You know, one of the things that, and it was in this reaction to this DC story that you hear is that it's almost like the kind of the default reaction when a newspaper says score gains are too good to be true, that the reaction is, oh, they must not believe poor kids can learn.
Yeah.
And I guess a sophisticated look at the numbers really sort of belies that. What advice do you give to reporters who, you know, who when they look at numbers come up against that? They say this is too good to be true, and people say, you know, you don't believe enough.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about
Sure,
what kind of indicators they should be looking at?
Well, first of all, look at all the schools.
Yeah.
And the programs that do those analyses, they don't know anything about the composition of the schools. So you want to look at all the schools. You want to look for differences that are really quite large, far beyond what we've been able to attain with the best programs, with the best people, with coordination, with what we talk about as alignment. The tests really do measure what the curriculum covers. And then set thresholds for what you're going to look at such that it doesn't matter what the backgrounds of the students at that school are. Those outcomes are just not credible. If you can do that, and if you can document the steps that you followed, the kind of people that you had involved, I always argue for having competent statisticians on the team. I think you can address that argument. We want all kids to learn. We want scores to go up. But we want them to go up because we did a better job of teaching the kids, not because we gave them the test in advance, or we walked around the room and said, Greg, you don't really mean that, do you?
Yeah.
You know,
Sure.
Johnny, you don't even have to say it. You just point. You don't want that, and that's going to change. You're not going to be able to get away with this stuff in the future. Stories like yours and others. Everybody in education is reading those stories. They know that the watchdogs are out there watching them. So.
Let's talk a little bit about DC.
Sure.
Can you talk a little bit about what the circumstances were when you arrived in DC? You know, who invited you in? What did they ask you to look at?
Sure. So we're a kind of a full-service test security company, the only one actually that exists. But they were interested particularly in what we call our security audit, or going in and look at their processes. I love to do that personally. It's very satisfying. And they were looking at meeting a specific directive of what is essentially the state authority. It's not a state, it's the District of Columbia, but it's called OSSI, who had analysis run by their testing vendors, CTB, of erasures and gain scores and some what we call collusion, unusual agreement. They wanted an agency, DC Public Schools wanted an independent agency to go out and go to all of the schools that were identified and to the classes, specific classes that were identified, and the teachers who were teaching those classes, to see if there was anything about what was going on in those schools and in those classes that seemed inconsistent with the testing rules and a possible explanation. So I like to say we're ecumenical. We'll do any project that's legal and moral and that you want. So we took on the security audit and the interviews, what we call investigations. It may not be a good term, because what we call investigations are feet on the ground, face-to-face interviews. They're not statistical. So those are the two things we did for the 2009 testing year. And they liked it. They felt it useful. They liked the independence of it, I think. And we fall over ourselves being available and flexible and meeting deadlines. So they asked us to do it again.
In 2010?
Yeah.
Now, was it the same set of schools, or was there a different group?
It's the set of schools identified by the testing vendor, and I can't comment on what schools they are, because this is now something that has been turned over by DCPS to the Inspector General of the District of Columbia, so it's not an open topic anymore. I'm sure they'll do their own investigating, and if they ask us, we'll tell them anything they want, but I think it would be not right for me to comment on it, on what we did.
Now, at this point, can you talk about not so much what you did, but what you were asked to do? I mean, in the realm of what you could do at a school that's in this position, was this a pretty cursory investigation? Was it would you call it limited? How would you kind of characterize it?
Because we're dealing now with somebody who's down the chain of access to data.
Right.
The testing vendor has it all.
Right.
The testing vendor runs the analyses under its contract and provides that data to OSSI. OSSI then provides to the district, and that's where we come in the picture. So I think given what we had, which is all that DC Public Schools had to work with, it's pretty thorough. I mean, we go to every one of those schools. We interview the principal, the assistant principal, the school testing coordinator, the teacher of a class that's been identified, the proctor for that teacher. It's kind of tough for them. I mean, here are these outside. I think I'm a pretty easygoing guy, but not when I walk into your school talking about having this data and asking you, Greg, and I wouldn't say Greg because I have to perform, Mr. Toppo, how is it that you have the greatest gain in math in grade X of any school in your district and one of the highest for the entire state or whatever? That's a pretty scary question, and they know that we're asking it of a bunch of different people too in the same place. I don't think it was cursory nor limited within the scope of what we had to work with. It's not, you know, we have a lot of other tools, but there would be no way for our best data analysis tools to be run on data that DC Public Schools has access to. And you have to get back into that chain of control all the way back to the testing vendor, and you have to get to the outcome after the answer sheets are scanned and the electronic record is made of what every student's response was read at by the scanner. So that's, give us that, we'll run super data. I mean, we're really good at that, and we have clients we run that for, and we'll produce pretty unambiguous results. But that's not even 10% of the states are doing that. I mean, it's a new phenomenon.
It's pretty rare.
Yeah. It won't be. I hope to live long enough that it becomes the standard.
Yeah.